As we get into spooky season, it only makes sense that we kick off with a free-to-play horror game on Steam. Not just any horror game though, one that's been around for a while, still has a decent player base given its age, and has a lot of content to play through. So grab your candy bag and let's enter the world of Cry of Fear, if you dare. Getting into a game is pretty quick, minus some odd issues I experienced with this 12-year-old game. I'll get into the specifics on that in a bit, but if you click New Game, you just select your difficulty and you're in. So Cry of Fear gets a point here. In multiplayer, at least from what I can tell, it doesn't seem to be the story that you play through. I went in to host a server and I just spawned in an awkward room with creatures all around me. I'd have to look into the gameplay more, but as it turns out, you can't just host a server and have a friend join on you. Again, because of the game's age, you either need to download a server browser from ModDB, or you need to use Hamachi. The developers actually have a tutorial on their YouTube channel, so I'll add a link to both the video and the ModDB link so you can check out both options. Unfortunately, the game doesn't get a point here because the multiplayer requires a third-party app to work. As for gameplay and figuring out the game's objective, there really isn't a tutorial, but there are some pop-ups that tell you how to perform some tasks. You can also press a button to figure out what your next objective is. For the most part, at least in the early game, notes on the ground give you clues or hints that are also used to solve puzzles. As you solve the puzzles, the story starts to unfold. Since it's easy to figure out how the game operates, it gets a point here. Even though the story remains quite the mystery and isn't always clear what's going on or why you're there, you end up discovering things as you go that drive the story. You acquire new weapons and you're introduced to monsters or ghosts or beings, whatever you want to call them. For the purpose of this video, we'll just call them the bad guys. You do also run into another character as you progress, but I don't want to put too many spoilers in this video. Let's just give it a point here and keep moving on. In terms of gameplay or replayability, it feels like there's a lot here. The multiplayer, even though it takes a sec to set up, has a bunch of different maps to choose from, which will give you and your friends a lot of options. In the single player mode, it feels like there's a lot of story here. I was actually curious what the gameplay was like, and howlongtobeat.com puts the average at about 8 hours 44 minutes, while the leisurely is more like 12 hours. So regardless of which game mode you choose, you'll have plenty of gameplay. Easy point here. I was very surprised to see how many people were playing Cry of Fear. This is a game that was released 12 years ago and it still has a following. When I played, there were 439 players online and the 24-hour peak was 610 players. You can see looking at the last week or so, there was a slight uptick, probably because we're getting into spooky season. But the crazy thing is that the uptick isn't really all that dramatic. Going back 3 months, this game just consistently has around 600 or 700 players. So the game gets another point in this area. Something I didn't mention at the start of this is that Cry of Fear has some adult content. Not nudity that I know of, but certain sensitive subjects like unaliving yourself, and of course there's gore. For that reason, I would recommend this game only be played by adults, but I'm just a guy who makes videos on the internet, so do what you want. The reason I bring this up is because I actually like that those things are portrayed in the game. I feel like games these days play it too safe, and it makes sense because you have to appeal to the majority, but there are some pretty graphic scenes here that aren't just gory for the sake of gore. They actually add to the story. But due to their sensitive nature, it's worth mentioning. The game has some awesome Silent Hill and Resident Evil vibes. I used to love both of those games growing up, and this kind of made me feel like I was playing one of them again. Cry of Fear is a horror game, and so it should be scary. But in addition to some of the jump scare moments scattered throughout, Jesus. The aesthetic and the sounds in the game really build suspense and adds to the overall experience. You feel like you need to creep around every corner because you just really don't know what's going to happen next. The way the story progresses and different mechanics appear over time makes the game feel more rewarding than just a standard gameplay loop of the same thing over and over. For example, taking pictures, unlocking new weapons, using a computer in-game and typing username and password to get a login passcode, or dialing a phone number with your phone for reasons. Again, I don't want to give away too much, so we'll give the game a point in this area, and I'll talk about some of the issues I experienced. Because this is an older game and started as a mod for the original Half-Life, it's built on what I assume is the original source engine. So the game was a bit quirky at the start. I ended up with a return null error, but the game still launched. Also, trying to play this in 1440p isn't recommended. When I would click on the UI, the position of the mouse wasn't accurate, so I basically had to click under an item in order to actually click on it. When I switched my resolution to 1920 by 1080, the issue didn't happen anymore. Another issue I ran into was the game just not responding here and there from the main menu. Once I was in game, everything was fine, but just the menu seemed to freak out sometimes and I'd have to restart the game. Otherwise, my overall experience was really good, and so Cry of Fear definitely gets another point here. I was a bit worried that being a puzzle game, I wasn't going to enjoy it, but there was enough of a mix of stuff going on that it didn't feel like a constant barrage of unsolvable puzzles. I actually had a really good time in this game. Because of its fun factor, it gets a point here. And because it was so fun, I can see myself coming back. I feel like I've only scratched the surface of this story and it got me kind of hooked. I'm excited to jump back in and see how this thing ends, which means that the game gets its last point here. Cry of Fear is a super interesting game with a great story and awesome mechanics. Again, it's probably a game for an older audience, but I would highly recommend it. And that's why Cry of Fear scores a 9 out of 10, putting it in S tier. If you're thinking about trying Cry of Fear, I've added links to the store page in the description. Also, don't forget to click the video link on your screen, because the next game might be your new favorite.